Assalamu alaikum, ISCJ community. Inshallah, alhamdulillah, we have a beautiful program today with two amazing guests. We'll get to them in a second, but I have to welcome everyone. And inshallah, Ramadan is almost upon us. Inshallah, ISCJ, as you know, follows the Fiqh Council of North America, and the first day of fasting will be on Friday, inshallah, April 24th. We will have Quran recitation starting Thursday night. And I'm very specific with the words I'm using, Quran recitation, not Taraweeh. There's no such thing as virtual Taraweeh, at least for ISCJ. So I want to make sure we're all clear on that. We'll have programming every night in Ramadan. You'll get to listen to the beautiful recitation of Nur Rustam. And alhamdulillah, basically we're going to call it Nur at night, every Thursday, every night, Ramadan at 10 p.m. inshallah. And of course, we'll hear from our beloved Imam Shibli 15 minutes before Isha every night, and then we'll have Dr. Ahmed and Sheikh Ashur earlier in the evening before Maghrib and Iftar. And so many amazing things are going to happen. And this is, yes, a unique Ramadan, and it's going to be an amazing, blessed Ramadan. Yes, we're not physically in our masajids, around the world, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a different plan for us, and we're going to make the most of it and take advantage of this blessed month, inshallah. I do want to share a couple things before we start with our guests. Tomorrow, guys, make sure you tune in at 8:30 the same time, because we're going to lay out the framework and our programs for Ramadan. So you're going to hear from Imam Shibli, you're going to hear from Dr. Ahmed, you're going to get to see the shiny face of our Mukri Nur Rustam, and you hear from Dr. Ahmed and you hear from Sheikh Ashur. So tomorrow, 8:30 p.m., you're going to get the scoop as to what's going to happen during the blessed month of Ramadan from an ISCJ perspective, inshallah. So don't forget that. And then the one other thing I did want to mention, and you guys can probably guess what that is what we have to do here all the time. And this is not just for ISCJ, but whatever masajid you're part of, wherever you're listening from, you need to support your Islamic institution. The masjid doors have been closed now for almost 5 weeks, I would say off the top of my head. And we know that every masjid has bills to pay. They're operational bills. We're not talking about expansion or capital projects. Guys, right? We have the staff. We have to pay their salaries, our beloved staff, right? Our imams, our scholars, our accounting office, our office admin. We want to pay them. We've got to pay their salaries and their benefits. We have property tax. We have insurance. We still have utility bills, and so on and so forth, right? So do your part. Every person is capable of doing something. Allah knows what that's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But do what you can, right? Don't wait for Ramadan. Tomorrow is not promised for anybody. We know what's going on with COVID, right? We have heard about so many janazas. We've made dua for all the people that passed away. Just in our own community, just in the past 7 days, we've conducted 16 or 17 janazas. And may Allah grant them the highest stations in heaven, inshallah. And may Allah grant sabr to the families and friends of those that have passed away and those that are sick, inshallah. So keep that in mind, right? So do what you can. It's one community, hashtag one community. We need 100% participation. Everybody can do something. So do what you can, inshallah. All right, so with that, the housekeeping is out of the way, folks, and we're excited. We have our two amazing guests that I'm about to introduce, and they're going to talk to us, and we're going to learn a lot about wealth management and estate planning / wills. I know sometimes we use the word estate planning and people don't realize that, but then when you say the word wills, then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's important to me. I want to learn about that, especially in Islamic context, right? And so we're going to get right to it. Our two guests today the first guest is Bilal Kaleem, and welcome, Bilal. And for those that don't know, Bilal, you're in New England, right? You're based out of New England.
In Boston, yeah.
In Boston specifically, and we won't hold that against you, all right? We got a lot of Yankee fans and Met fans and Giant and Jet fans. How you feeling? How you feeling about Gronk going to Tampa?
Gronk, Brady, it's they're all gone. It's just gonna be a whole new world. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Welcome to the world of losing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
We knew this was happening. That's why we we worked it out so COVID would happen and the games would all get delayed.
All right. So Bilal, for those that don't know, while he's physically in Boston, he has ties to Central Jersey. You know, he comes to Central Jersey a lot, you know, with MCGP and ISCJ, and actually Hoopoe Advisors actually manages ISCJ's endowment fund. So, you know, thank you for doing that for us and the community, and having a footprint here too. So we're looking forward to benefiting from your knowledge. Bilal, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself beyond just what I just said before we dive into questions? And I also want to introduce Abed after you introduce yourself.
Sure. I'll be very brief. I actually come to ISCJ a lot. I mean, speaking of janazas and funerals and weddings, a lot of my family has gotten married there with Imam Shibli, has gotten buried there with Imam Shibli, you know, by Imam Shibli's doing the rites and so forth. So it's a dear masjid community to us. My parents live about 25 minutes from there, just over the border in Pennsylvania. But I grew up in Brooklyn. Before that, in Nigeria, actually. I was born in Africa. I have 3 kids, you know, 10, 9, and 7, something like that. I should know. But those of you who have 3 can probably relate. Professionally, my background is originally in technology and engineering. I did my undergrad and master's at MIT. We did a startup, it got sold. Then I worked at Oracle for a few years, big tech company. And then actually switched over to nonprofit. My wife was doing her master's in social work. We had just gotten married. I was very inspired by what she was doing, and we didn't have too many bills to pay, and we had saved up a lot from the for-profit stuff having gone well. So I went and did nonprofit for a number of years, was the executive director actually of the organization that was trying to set up the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center, which is the big mosque in the heart of Boston that maybe you heard about. At that time, it was a $17 million project to try to build something that, you know, has a footprint on the skyline of Boston, in the heart of Boston. So I did that for a number of years. You know, we built it, finished it, built an endowment, built some staff, so forth. Got Imam Sohaib Webb. So it was a big learning experience, but it actually, funnily enough, got me into finance because I felt that my main job was to professionally beg people for money, which is a thankless, but very important and critical job. I have my deepest sympathies to your announcements earlier, and I echo them, and I hope everybody donates, inshallah. But that got me interested in finance in a more strategic way. After the time in nonprofit, I went back to school at Harvard, did a master's in finance and international trade, and then went and worked at JP Morgan for a number of years, focusing on their investment businesses, first in the private bank, which is their high net worth client business, clients who are 30 million and above in net worth, investing their assets, and then as vice president in their chief investment office, which is the other side, which is JP Morgan's own capital, not client capital. So that was about 350 billion at that time that we were investing. But the whole goal was always to set up or join or be a part of an enterprise in finance that's also operating on ethical principles. So a number of years ago, I left, joined a couple of folks, some friends and contacts who I knew who had set up an investment practice. We got a couple more partners, rebranded it as Hoopoe Advisors, and that's where we are now. And we do wealth management, we do a strategic philanthropy, we do you know, liquidity planning. So we're a broker dealer, an investment manager, a wealth manager, as well as a real estate investment firm, because there are a number of different entities set up in the proper regulatory way. So we do all of those different things, including estate planning, actually. We have folks within our team who lead that and liaise with outside attorneys. That's
You're a full shop.
It's a full spectrum wealth management shop. Most of our clients are actually not Muslim, but a very large chunk are.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So before we get to Abed, just real quick, you said you have 3 kids, right? Are they watching you right now? Do you need to shout them out and say, hi, kids? Take that chance if they are. We'll give it to you.
I see mine peeking through the door every now and then.
Ah, okay. All right. Cool deal. Alhamdulillah. Abed, brother Abed Awad, let's hear from you, because and you have a lot to live up to, because here Bilal here, he just made the dream of every Muslim, household, every parent went to MIT and Harvard. I don't know how anybody can top that.
Oh no, there's no way we can't top that. I mean, he's the whiz kid. I'm just a kid from Jersey, born in Inglewood, New Jersey.
Okay.
And was fortunate enough to be raised in Palestine. So I went from second grade to 11th grade in Palestine. So I have 10 years growing up in Ramallah, in a small village where my family's from. Then came back to New Jersey, and my connection is Shibli. He performed my marriage. So and my parents, attended the mosque in the early 90s. Late 80s and early 90s when it first started, before there's a lot more mosques around that are closer to them now. I'm a lawyer by profession, by vocation, but prior to going to law school, I went to the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies to study Islamic law and Islamic studies. I spent 2 years, graduate certificate in comparative law, and a master's in Islamic studies with the focus on hadith, but my emphasis was on a theological movement called Al-Mu'tazila, and wrote my thesis about their hadith criticism. Then I went to law school, clerked for a judge in the Superior Court in New Jersey, and then opened up my practice. I've never worked for anyone, typical, Middle Eastern, Palestinian, Pakistani entrepreneurs. I've never had a boss. I worked for my dad. He taught me to be an entrepreneur. I worked flea markets. I used to do the English Town flea market for many years. So I'm not sure.
I know.
From like 86 up until like 89, I was a peddler and selling stuff. In my practice, I over the years created a very unique expertise. So my expertise is in, I'm AV rated by Martindale Hubbell as a preeminent lawyer in New Jersey. And I'm a fellow of the International Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, which is a invite-only academy of lawyers who have an expertise in international family law. So a lot of my work in family law and in estate planning, what have you, is really involves international components. So, and I also am on the adjunct faculty of Rutgers Law School. I've been teaching there for the past 15 years. I teach Islamic law, I teach Islamic finance and banking, and I teach New Jersey family law. I also teach a state-based family law course. And I developed this expertise on Islamic law, and I provide a lot of expert services around the country for judges and lawyers and so forth. I've done trainings for lawyers and so forth. So the area of Sharia compliant estate planning became an area of my academic interest and also now my practice. So I'm the founder of Shariawiz.com, which is going live tonight. Shariawiz.com is a website that you are able to, Muslim Americans can create a Sharia compliant estate plan. And when we say a Sharia compliant estate plan, we're talking about a will, a healthcare directive, and a general power of attorney. These are not for complex clientele that Brother Bilal handles that have hundreds of millions. We're talking people who have a few $1 million in assets. If they're married, they have a very large marital deduction currently. So tax exposure is not as significant as it used to be. So we provide this Sharia compliant estate plan that has some unique Sharia solutions, because we're trying to take into account the elective share issues, the gender inequity issues that some people perceive. And we are looking at Sharia as a dynamic, evolving knowledge production methodology, and we're hoping to engage Muslim Americans and provide them with this opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'm looking forward to diving into this with you and Bilal on your respective fields. ISCJ community, You just heard some of the credentials, and that's just a quick version. That's the elevator version of these two individuals and their credentials. Make sure you guys are going to ask questions in the chat, because let's take advantage of this opportunity. We have top-notch professionals here. You know, the funny thing is both of you, I heard you guys talk about Imam Shibli, and you know how I think with Imam Shibli, I think it's only 2 degrees of separation. There's no 6 degrees of separation. I think there's 2 throughout, at least in the US and even maybe the world. Alhamdulillah. Allah bless him and his family. Alhamdulillah. All right, so Bilal, I know you have a little bit of a time commitment crunch, so we're going to start with you here. Bilal, you know, everyone's getting their statement, you know, in the mail or electronically, and when I say statement, their 401k statement, and like, you know, I don't want to even open it because it's just depressing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
What are you telling your clients? You know, it's like, you know, what can you, in this time period, how do you, you know, bring them down from the ledge or off the ledge?
Well, actually, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, actually, that's a very good piece of advice right there. Don't open the statement. And I'm not really joking about it, in the sense that the main thing here is long term. And if you're talking about things like retirement accounts and so forth, and if, you know, I know some people are close to retirement who may be watching, so obviously it's different for them. But probably many people or most people would be still several years away from retirement. And in that case, it's you have to maintain perspective, and this is an unprecedented pullback, but definitely I believe, and we can talk in more detail why, things have a strong chance that the economy will work itself back after we move past some of the health and public safety limitations, and we can talk about that in more detail. So the best thing in a time like this is not to be reactive, not to make big moves, not to get worked up, but rather, you know, stick through it. Hopefully you're invested in a broad, diversified way. And even if you're mostly in the stock market, as long as it's diversified, it'll work itself back over the coming years. And if you're one of the people who have some luxury of having extra surplus cash that's not needed for several years, then you're in a great place. And you have to be brave when others are afraid. That's how you grow wealth for the long term. And so you should, this is a good time to consider investing. Of course, if you're not comfortable and familiar with it, you should work with somebody who knows what they're doing and can do it in a prudent, diversified way that works for you. And then the biggest thing in all this is to remember that at the end of the day, it's Ar-Razzaq who's the provider, Allah, obviously, as we know. And so just remember all those attributes of Allah that really is where everything's coming from. He's Ar-Razzaq, He's the provider, He's Al-Kareem, the generous one, He's Al-Nafi', the one who benefits, He's Al-Wahhab, the bestower of gifts and so forth. So, you know, these are all the different dimensions of Allah, and that's really where any of our rizq is coming from. So don't let your statements for a moment put that reality out of our minds, inshallah.
Inshallah. So Bilal, let's dive into it. You mentioned let's dive into it right now. What do you see on the horizon, short term and long term? Educate us.
Sure. Well, I'll give a little bit of broader perspective. The main effect that everyone can obviously see is that we're in a self-imposed economic stoppage. It's like everybody went on strike. You know, unions actually used to do this to give a limited damage somewhere in the economy to get people to pay attention. We all just went on strike together collectively and shut the economy down. And so we're seeing expectations that GDP, which is the measure of how much the economy growth is, so GDP growth, which grows 3-ish% a year on average, this year in the second quarter is expected to be something like 15 to 20% negative. Something like that happening that fast hasn't ever really happened. Not that fast. It has gone that negative, but never that fast. And so, but the good thing is, because this is a self-imposed slowdown, the turnaround is also expected to be faster than normal. How fast is still an open question, but faster than normal. And most economists think that in the fourth quarter, we may begin to see some GDP growth again. And by next year, that GDP growth, or the growth of the economy, will be even faster than in normal years because of all the pent-up economic activity that needs to happen. So, but what does all that mean for our portfolios and our and the markets and so forth? The good thing is markets move far in advance of what's going on in the economy because they anticipate things. So, and that's why the market fell so much faster than even all of this actually took place. And in the same way, the markets are likely to expected to rise in a more sustainable way, also faster than this whole thing plays out, because we're all reading that the health part of this might take 18 months, might take longer in terms of fully playing out. And the economy itself also might take into next year and so forth before it turns positive, but the markets will probably go a bunch before that. It doesn't mean we'll recover everything in our portfolios quickly. That might take a couple of years, it might take more. But it will definitely grow out of this. Is something is what you can probably expect and plan around.
So you mentioned the GDP, right, Bilal? And GDP, is that you're talking about globally, all countries, or specifically for the U.S.?
I was talking about for the U.S. Globally, that may be different because the US in some ways controls its destiny much more than some of the other countries do. But we'll drag other countries along because once the US starts doing better, then countries that export to the US will do better and so forth. So, but if you're looking in Asia, you're looking in China, you're looking in countries that rely on exports a lot, you're looking on countries that don't control their currency, you're looking at countries whose debt is in currencies other than their own. Those countries will suffer a lot longer. But in the US, we have a lot of levers to pull, many of which we've already pulled. We've basically printed up money, lent it to the government, and then the government is lending it to all different parts of the economy, some wise, some unwise, but you just had to move fast. So being able to do that means the US GDP will be able to start seeing favorable results faster than other places. Okay,
all right. So, well, there is a connection. It's not necessary, but U.S. can move things on their own and have other people come along, other countries, other regions come along.
Yeah, because our economy relies more on keeping people spending, people within the U.S. Other countries' economies may rely more on either exporting a lot or building things in their own country. But in the US, we rely more on people going out feeling confident and spending. And that's why all the programs that we see around us many of them are focused around keeping people getting a paycheck, keeping businesses from not stopping paychecks to their employees, letting people get forbearance on their mortgage, just so that they have cash flow still in their pockets so that they don't completely stop spending, even though they pretty much have slowed it down a lot now. But when some of the social distancing eases up, they'll have the means to go out there and start spending, because when they spend, that's the biggest part of our economy. Companies will keep moving. They'll hopefully rehire again. So that's one of the big still variables out there. The big question mark that's hanging out there is how well will the turning the economy back on work? Because at the end of the day, the government can't force companies to rehire the 22 million who've been laid off or furloughed in unemployment, which is another historic number just in these past 3 weeks, basically. So they can't force everybody to rehire, and they can't force us to spend. So that's why there's still a big risk in the markets in these next few weeks, and there'll be a lot of volatility. But we see it all as a timing issue. So the way we see it is, the big risk is there. The risk is more on timing, as in the economy turning back on. Does it take 1 month? Does it take 6 months? Does it take a year? So that makes a lot of timing difference. But ultimately, in the long term, it'll still happen, inshallah.
Inshallah.
That's what I call very interesting. I'm going to comment is on Brother Bilal. This is the American fiction, and this is the capitalist, Western-based economic system that's based on a fiction. The majority of our GDP, just like Bilal explained, is from consumer spending. So it's basically, we just want everybody to spend money, even if it's money they don't have. So when we talk about consumer spending that possibly, and Bilal can correct me, this is his area of expertise, may constitute 70 or 80% of our GDP. So we want everybody to have money, even if it's on debt and on credit, just keep spending, which keeps our GDP working. So that's why there's a paranoia right now in the US with this unemployment, because people need access to credit to keep the economy going. Doesn't mean that GDP, at 3% trickles down to economic equity and redistribution of wealth. In fact, this entire system is why there's this substantial gap between the rich and the poor, and the concentration of capital in small companies or in small individuals. If you look at Azad, for example, and other Sharia compliant funds, as of yesterday, I know today, I know my things took a hit, but I'm only down 10% from the time of the crash, because of the emphasis in this ethical investing and avoiding over leveraging and debt and investment in certain banks and industries and so forth. The Sharia compliant investing actually is a lot safer. And I see that happening all the time. But I really want our listeners and people to understand is that this GDP fixation that is taken over in Morocco, in Pakistan, in all these Muslim countries has done nothing but create more poverty, more debt, more destruction. In my class in Islamic finance, in Pakistan, a Muslim country with the anti-Sharia legislation, if you take a personal loan, you're paying 20% interest. It's obscene. The entire system is based on riba. The entire system is based on interest. And people taking loans to spend money so the big companies can make it. It's very unfair. And now we're starting to see the moral bankruptcy of the system with the COVID. Overnight, in a couple of weeks, the whole system is collapsing. But I agree with Bilal, a year and a half, we'll be back. People will start spending, credit will be available, and we'll get back on track.
Inshallah, inshallah. So let me ask you guys a question here, because both of you touched on it, but let's get more specific. Are there any, because like Abed, you said that you haven't taken a big loss, and Bilal, you said there are some things there, but are there specific halal investments that were not affected by this current crisis?
I don't think so. I mean, everything, and Bilal knows this is his area, so he's in a better position. I'm just saying on the diversification, and Bilal is 10,000% on point. It's really leveraging, diversifying. If you stay in the market on the long run, I mean, I saw these indexes that if you're in the market on a 30-year, you're going to average that 5-6% return, whether when the market goes up 20% or goes down. I mean, that's just very, very solid and conservative investing. And Bilal is an expert on that. And he's handling not-for-profits and endowments. So he's going to be much more conservative on the diversification. Am I correct, Bilal? Is that kind of the approach?
Yeah, diversification is key. And to your point, Arif, about are there particular sectors that have done better? Definitely there are. I mean, healthcare and technology are two big ones, and both would be most of the companies in healthcare and technology would fall within the Sharia compliant investing things. And in fact, you find most Sharia compliant portfolios are overweight on healthcare and technology. Obviously, in this case, healthcare is doing good for obvious reasons, and technology is doing good also for obvious reasons, and some not so obvious reasons. Obvious reasons because, I mean, we're all right now we're using more technology in different ways. So that's but that streams all the way through, because all the things that we're not doing in person, we need some technological assist to it, and all the big tech players are coming in. But even if you expand the lens more broadly, the focus should be on quality. Quality companies that have been invested in for the long term, where the mindset when you're going in to invest is that you are looking to become an owner of a company. And when you go to become an owner of a company, you would pick a company that you think can survive ups and downs and that you'd like to be an owner of for a number of years. That you shouldn't ever have a day trading mentality or something that, okay, I think this will do good these next few months. I think this is very opportunistic. Those things inevitably you often get burned. And so you should be looking for companies that are profitable, have been profitable for a long time, have been paying dividends, increasing their dividends, doing so from revenues as opposed to cheap debt, that aren't overly leveraged, that are in strong, sustainable businesses. And usually sustainable businesses means you have to have overall relatively ethical business practices, because that's what weakens your sustainability if you don't have that. And you have to have a relatively ethical products that you're creating that don't, basically catch up on you with things going wrong. So all of those things are helped by the sort of Sharia informed mindset, if you will. And then with those type of principles, then the diversification is more like you can accomplish that, if you have some understanding of finance and investing in terms of what makes good diversification, what are the sectors, how the economy is already divided across the various sectors of the economy, like technology, healthcare, financials, consumer, real estate, materials, industrials, all those different sectors that are there. You have to have an understanding of what percent do they exist in the economy naturally anyway. And then you have to figure out, well, how do you get that type of representation in a broad portfolio? And then where would you go overweight? Where would you go underweight? So if you're doing that in a sort of a balanced way, it's not rocket science, but it does. It's good to have some background in that. If you do that well, then what Brother Abed said definitely plays true, which is that, look, the market's going to tank every few years. Sometimes in a small way, like it did in 2015 and so forth, and other times in a major way, like in 2008 and now and so forth. But historically, last 100 plus years, the average annual return has been around 8%. So if you just stay invested, you're diversified, and you're investing for the long term, you can expect, or historically, you can have expected that type of return. And even if you look at any kind of 6-ish plus year in that last 100 plus years, even going back to the Great Depression, beyond the Great Depression, you're always ahead of where you were kind of 6+ years ago. So obviously the past doesn't guarantee anything about the future, but it's, the most that we can kind of rely on in terms of thinking about the future in terms of what we have. So you should take that type of kind of long-term view, be balanced, be prudent, and invest in quality, ethical things. And that'll be 90% of the battle.
Yeah. Now, Bilal, I'm going to ask you a question. So while I agree with you, we all know it's a diversification over the long haul. What advice do you give somebody who is near retirement? He's 59, 60, and now he gets this COVID and this disaster. So he doesn't have that long-term planning to be able to recover. Do you advise people when they reach a certain age to totally recalculate, put more in cash and treasuries as opposed to investments? What would you advise somebody who's 60 in the market today?
Yeah, well, it's incremental. You don't want to find yourself unbalanced just a few years before retirement. So this shouldn't, ideally, if people shouldn't be being caught by surprise where they're all into the market and this happens and they're just a couple years away from retirement. It means someone hasn't given them good advice, or if they've been doing it themselves, it's a bit unfortunate that they ended up in that situation. But basically, what we tell folks is you should be investing in the markets, i.e. the stock markets, only that part of your portfolio that you comfortably feel that you don't plan on touching for 5+ years. It's a fairly long outlook. Some people, feel, well, that's kind of, draconian in some ways. But You know, we take risk seriously because things like this happen. And to your earlier point, I think in many ways the economy, the debt-based economy, which is what it is, has been getting more unbalanced in each economic crisis, because our solution to it has always been pile on more debt, which makes the next crash down be even more volatile. So putting that issue aside, these crises could be worse and worse. So you want to make sure you're not investing too much in the markets when you might need it in a few years. If you are where you are now, you kind of have to do a calibration and say, hey, look, what do I know that I don't need to touch for 5+ years? Same question, but you can't look backwards. That's water under the bridge. So suppose, I mean, maybe before COVID happened, you had, I'll pick round numbers. This doesn't mean you need to have this or not need to have this. Maybe you had $1 million. Now after COVID happened, you're at, you know, $700,000. You can't cry too much about the 300,000 and say, I have to try to make it back. I have to try to make it back. If retirement is in 2 years, or 1 year or 2 years, you have to say, okay, it is what it is. What do I need in those first couple years of retirement? You figure out that amount of money. Obviously, these next couple years you're going to work, but the 2 years, 3 years after that, what type of money you need for that, and that has to be in a much more conservative kind of short-term type of mindset. And then what you won't need to beyond that is further in retirement. That you can, you know, put in the markets and give it, you know, it'll work its way back, inshallah. That's broad strokes. Obviously, depending on different people, you can make it a little more aggressive. Maybe you have a very high income, so these next couple of years you can be aggressive about saving. In that case, you can lean into the market more, or vice versa. So this is more broad brush, but yeah, you can't look backwards. No use crying over spilt milk. You got to look ahead and see what's 5+ years. Invest that in the market; it'll come back. Add money if you have surplus cash, but stuff that you need within a couple of years, you're going to have to stay conservative with that.
I know we are going to get to the wills and the estate planning, folks. I know a lot of people want to have questions on that, but since we're not talking about the economy and the market, let's stick with that. But I promise everyone that we will get to estate planning and Shariawiz. I promise. We'll give that equitable time. A couple of questions have come in, and I want to ask that. You know, here is what's the average drawdown in account value which your clients are seeing for their investments right now?
It really depends on what their kind of investment objective is and how aggressive they are. But I'll make some assumptions so that it's more useful of an answer. I imagine you mean, or I'll take it that you mean basically an equities account, an account that's invested in the markets. Like Brother Abed said, our portfolios were invested in the way that I described. With an overweight to healthcare, to tech, to you know, and companies that were paying higher dividends and increasing their dividends. So they were. I mean, the market's been moving so fast, so it depends what you're talking about. But let's say, for example, at its worst, the market had fallen around 30 in the low 30s or mid 30s, something around there percent. While equities portfolios here were down about 27, 26% if you're all in on equities in the peak drop. But also sometimes the one narrow biggest drawdown is not the most useful thing to look at as well, because you also have to look at, well, which things were also recovering faster and which things how they were doing year to date. Because when we looked at our year-to-date numbers, which takes in some of the gains earlier in the year, including in the market, then it was even better because they were doing better in those times than the market was doing. So they were falling from a higher point. So even though they fell less than the market, if you even take into account where they had risen, then it was even better. And then the recovery was also better because these quality names, the momentum trend, momentum being, you know, before the market fell, the types of companies that were doing well were what were called quality or momentum companies, companies that were strong companies that seemed to just already be doing quite well. So we were overweight in some of those, but then when the market came down and when we had that couple weeks of recovery, these last couple weeks, those did very well because they were in healthcare and technology. In fact, the NASDAQ even went positive for the year. If you look at year to date at the end of Friday, which was very, very surprising. So to many people to know that. So all said, the drawdown was I would approximate was probably in the high 20s at its worst. But if you even take a broader look, it was better than that.
Okay. I think people are looking for that stock tip. And look, I don't think Bilal can give that to us. I'm not sure, but I know people are asking. But maybe in a broad stroke, I know you mentioned the healthcare sector, technology sector. But are there any industries or any sectors that you can say are good buy low candidates right now? People have cash, and where should they invest in?
Well, I think it really, I hate answering what to invest in a general way in an open audience because it depends on who it is really. But that having been said, what I'll say is that you have to invest across the economy. You know, putting aside financials, because the financial sector, most of the financials companies are going to be over leveraged, but you have to be invested apart from that in all the sectors because they all play a role in the economy. Where it would make sense to be overweight right now, though trying to come in now would be chasing that a little bit, but still it's not the worst thing. Where you would be overweight after having invested across would be as healthcare, technology, consumer staples, and then some places if you have things that have fallen very far, but have a long-term, if you're in it for the very long term, I mean, energy is very low, and it's going to be a multi-year play because there's other dynamics going on besides just COVID. I mean, there's the geopolitical dynamic between Saudi, Russia, and the US going on, and the price war. But given that it's at its basically lowest ever type of lows, there's some opportunity there if you have a high appetite for volatility and holding it for the very long term. But in all of these areas, you should be looking at strong, profitable, dividend-paying companies that have a good business model, that have a strong balance sheet, which means they can survive not making good revenues for some time without worrying about bankruptcy. So you have to be looking for companies like that.
Okay, that makes sense. For either of you, Abed, I know you've been patiently waiting here, and we're going to get to the will stuff, Shariawiz, inshallah.
No problem, brother.
For this question is for both of you. What about the real estate market? What are your thoughts on that? Where do you see what's on the horizon from a real estate perspective?
Real estate is going to lag what's happening in the broader market because it's going to take a little longer to get hit. It's already getting hit, obviously. I'm sure anyone who's trying to sell a home or sell a property is for sure, feeling that. Obviously people are delaying rents. A lot of small businesses are struggling, so they won't be paying their landlord's rent, retail plot. So it's definitely going to get a lot messier before it gets better in real estate. I don't think we've seen the worst yet. I don't think it's going to be an 08. And there isn't some kind of like toxic debt by and large within real estate right now. But the parts that will be stronger are going to be what's called industrial, which is kind of the warehouses, logistics, that type of facilities that are a big support to kind of e-commerce and just deliveries and things like that, and storage and warehousing and inventory. So real estate that concentrates on that, real estate that concentrates on housing, even though housing is going to also feel some pain because people will have trouble paying the same amount of rents, but still people have to live somewhere. The government's trying to support consumers. So housing's overall is multifamily apartments and especially near urban areas where there's a limitation on housing anyway, that's going to continue to do fine. Retail, kind of grocery anchored retail will probably be the next spot. The parts that will be tough is going to be office, office as well as kind of, commercial, where it's not grocery anchored retail, but more, other types of commercial other than that. But the whole thing's it's gonna go down and then come back up. But that's an opportunity. I mean, I think this is not a '08 type of problem. I think this is gonna be better than that, inshallah.
So, Abed, chime in on here. I think you have expertise and knowledge, especially in the New Jersey market, probably.
Yeah, well, what you're seeing is there's a collapse in retail real estate. So all of the commercial, I mean, the offices that Bilal said is one issue, but then the real estate in the malls, they're basically were on life support to begin with prior to COVID. They're not going to be able to make their money. So the future is really reinvigorating and rethinking retail spaces, not in the traditional sense, but creating entertainment-based, engaged shopping experiences. Otherwise, the old-fashioned, go to the mall to hang out and buy is not going to work with this online giants, even Walmarts and the Amazon. So you're going to have a lot of malls that are going to be in bankruptcy. So all of the retail and the office are going to take a major hit. And we see that even in our office. My partner is a real estate attorney. We are not getting those commercial transactions that we were getting earlier in the year.
Yeah.
Bilal, how are you doing on time? I know you said you might have to, we're at 9:17. I could keep asking questions, or but I want to be respectful of your personal and professional time also.
I can go for about 3 or 4 minutes, so maybe another question, maybe two.
Yeah. Okay. So we did have a question here in the chat: how to move from a more aggressive equities portfolio to a less volatile approach, such as bonds and treasuries. What is good Sharia compliant approach to avoid interest?
There really isn't much of a good answer, because, well, in one sense, it's not that different, because even treasuries and so forth are not really yielding anything right now, so you're not missing out. But yeah, if you're going short term here in the U.S. in terms of your investment options in a Sharia compliant way, there aren't too many short term options. Because those would be interest bearing. In terms of sukuk funds and the like, perhaps I don't know if Abed, you have familiarity with the Azad Sukuk Fund or Amanas Participation Fund, but those also have some of the dynamics of emerging market debt, which means in one sense they're a fixed income option, but there's also some other potential risks there. And in general, in this time, what happened is all bond funds, whether it's sukuk or otherwise, mutual funds in general, every product really had a liquidity issue, in the sense that a lot of people were selling. So when you're selling, if people are aggressively selling, what can happen to a mutual fund is that its price, its market price, can move far away from the underlying value of the assets that it's holding, because just the supply demand is so imbalanced. So when things like that happen, even what you thought were conservative instruments, whether it's bonds or the sukuks, can get hit pretty bad. So in terms of real safety, I mean, really there aren't much options besides cash if you're being very, very conservative. If you are just trying to diversify away from equities, then there are some low leverage, private, conservative, diversified core, what are called private real estate investment trusts, or REITs, that do things in a responsible, balanced way. There's also some very bad REITs out there that take advantage of people, but there's some good low leverage REITs out there that can provide some diversification and income, and reduce some of the volatility in your portfolio over the longer term. There wouldn't be what you'd consider a short-term investment. They're not short-term investments, but there's something to add to, remove some of the volatility in the portfolio and provide a different way of providing income and a hard asset in that, without needing to go out and find and buy real estate on your own, which is hard and takes a lot more money.
You should take a look at Azad. So that the questioner, go to azad.com and see the, we have a sukuk fixed income product, and you could take a look at it.
All right, Bilal, we'll let you go. But before I let you go, I got a message for both of you from Imam Shibli. He heard both of you shout him out, so he asked me to convey to you guys salams. He was very grateful that you
May
guys.
Allah bless you and keep you healthy, and you keep you giving us wisdom for a long, long time, inshallah.
He's our godfather.
And keep the jokes coming.
Yeah, we need that, especially even in this time. Bilal, much sincere gratitude to you. May Allah reward you. Thank you for the time that you committed to us. May Allah make it easy and keep your family and your friends safe and healthy during this time. And we'll talk again soon. We'll invite you back in person.
Ameen. Yeah, we'll look forward to it. Whether you invite me or not, I'll be there.
All right, great. That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Take
All
care.
right.
Assalamu
Wa alaikum
Assalam wa rahmatullah.
Abed, it's just me and you, one-on-one.
One-on-one. The
One-on-one.
Jersey kids.
Yeah, so one-on-one, who would win, LeBron or Jordan?
I like LeBron.
All right, look, we have to talk about wills, Islamic wills, estate planning. That's your wheelhouse. You have a lot of wheelhouse, a lot of knowledge and expertise in many different domains. But right now, this is your focus. We have an audience. We have a captive audience. Inherently, we all know as Muslims, we need to have wills, even if we, even non-Muslims know this, right? People of all faith, especially in this country and how things work. What commit the people that are on the sidelines? I know it's a tough topic. It's a tough discussion. We don't want to have that with our family members for, valid reasons, I'll even say, right? But what can you tell us? Make us flip the switch for those that don't have a will, that we're going to go and do this tonight and tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's always, I need to make this clear. I'm not giving legal advice over the phone. I'm not creating an attorney-client relationship with the viewers right now. I'm giving you legal information and education. Number one, you can go to a lawyer. It's always advisable, retain an attorney. He can create your estate plan. When we say an estate plan, we mean a last will and testament, a healthcare directive living will, and a general power of attorney. So you can go to a lawyer, can pay him a fee. It may be a little bit expensive, and he can handle it for you. What I'm trying to do is to encourage and raise awareness in the Muslim community that you can do the same thing. You can go to a lawyer and pay, but if you want to do it from the comfort of your room, you can go and do this by yourself. We're offering you a platform so that you would be able to create your own Sharia compliant estate plan within 15 to 20 minutes on your smartphone or on your computer and protect your family. Why do you need a will? Doesn't matter. You don't have to be a millionaire to need a will. In the will, you tell your family, you let the world know, these are what my wishes are. I'm appointing my brother as my executor. So I know he knows my financials and he's going to gather up everything. Or I'm appointing my wife because she knows where everything is. Otherwise, when you die without a will, we got to go to court and get somebody appointed. You're doing your will also to let everybody know how you want your estate to be distributed. In the Quran, it talks about the fixed share system in Surah An-Nisa, that it's an apportionment from God. This is not a discretionary distribution. This is a divine directive that we devolve and distribute our estate according to this fixed share system. If you don't have a will, it's going to be the state of New Jersey that's going to determine how your will is going to be distributed as an intestate decedent. Do you want to appoint guardians for your kids? You don't know. A person doesn't know where he's going to die. You want the family to go to court fighting on who's going to handle the guardianship of your kids? Clear that up, put it in a will. So in the event of there's a need of a guardianship, you have selected the person you trust to handle these affairs for you. How about your burial rights? How about your end of life issues? Do you want a do not resuscitate order? Do you want to be left on life support? Do you want Muslim principles to govern on autopsies? Do you want Muslim principles to govern for purposes of, organ donation. All of these things are in your estate plan. Currently, you have an elderly father. It's COVID. He can't go anywhere. He needs to go to the bank. You have a general power of attorney in your estate plan that allows you to take care of your elderly parent, ill brother, incapacitated wife, so that you don't have to now go to court and you have to prove incapacity and you got to get appointed to handle the affairs of your family. So these are things that are very simple. You go to Shariawiz.com, you could do it for $250 in 15, 20 minutes. And you can update it every 6 months. You can update it every year. You handle your affairs, and it forces you to think about end of life. Because as Muslims, we know that this is a transitionary period. And what we do, al-amal al-salih, and our righteous and virtuous conduct, in the end, is paving the journey and the way to the hereafter. So we know there's a hereafter. So let's sort things out right now so that we don't have our families going to courts and litigating and wasting time and having people trying to determine what your intentions were or what your wishes were. Put them on paper and it'll take you 20 minutes, or go to a lawyer, hire a lawyer to do it for you. And the Sharia compliant solutions that we provide is that we look at the Shariawiz project is more than just an estate planning project for Muslim Americans. It's a project to create a conversation, raise awareness about end-of-life issues in our community, and also to explain to Muslims that the Sharia is a method, it's an epistemology. It's a method that produces knowledge. For 1,300 years, it produced knowledge that grew one of the most sophisticated legal systems and civilizations in the world. So we as Americans, as Sharia is not static. It evolves and adapts to the circumstances surrounding it. So we understand today, if you're living in New Jersey and your wife is going to be told that she will only receive 1/8 of the estate Islamically, she may have a problem with that. She has to understand the parameters of this 1/8. But I provide Sharia solutions that have been present in the Sharia since the 7th century. So we are providing solutions like increasing your mahr during your lifetime, joint titling property in your lifetime, acknowledging the contributions to facilitate the acquisition of the marital estate. Because under Islamic law, under the marriage contract, you're supposed to provide food, shelter, and clothing. If she's working, pooling money, that means you're creating a joint enterprise. You're creating that the wife or the spouses have legal and equitable interest in this property. So these are issues that we take into account in the Shariawiz template, the Shariawiz form that allows you in an automated fashion to consider these options to make a Sharia compliant estate plan that is equitable and fair to everybody involved. You still within your faith and you protect your family.
So that was a lot right there. So let's dive into that. I think you gave a couple examples, like, where the wife only gets 1/8, but then you just said over the course of a marriage or a lifetime, you pool the assets or joint title. What about children? Some people are uncomfortable, right? Giving my son twice as much as my daughter. What are my options based on, the Sharia and Quran?
Well, they're in the Shariawiz application, what we've provided is that a father advises here's what the Sharia rule is. The fiqh on this issue is that a son must reduce or disclaim part of his share in favor of his sister. As long as it's an adult by consent, you can have equal shares. The big $64,000 question is the current understanding or reading of the fiqh is that this consent from the son must take place after the father or mother's death. So it cannot take place in the lifetime of the parent. So in our particular template, if you select you want equal shares, the son is advised by mom or dad that I told you, son, during my lifetime, I want your sister to have an equal share like you. I hope that you take my recommendation into account after I die. and that you reduce it. And you understand that you're not obligated to, under the Sharia, under the Islamic law, to make that reduction. So that's really the level of our ability under the current fiqh readings. But we want to create this conversation and get these scholars to start engaging in this issue, because the reason why a daughter received half from the son, which you probably will hear a lot, that it was different society. Now, men have a lot more obligations towards their female members of the family. But are men doing that today? In most circumstances, they're not. Now, in an Islamic setting, it wasn't a discretionary obligation. It was an obligation by operation of law. In every fiqh book, there's a section that's called Nafaqat al-Aqarib, maintenance and support of relatives. Your aunt had a claim against you. Your sister had a claim against you. Your daughter, your wife, your niece. These are female members who would have a claim against you for support. So our legal system does not provide that. So those avenues where that existed in the pre-modern time that required a male to receive more of this share was because he had more obligations. He doesn't today. And again, I think that this is a fiqh issue that is going to take place, and there's going to be conversations about it. When it comes to the issue of your wife, the issue regarding the wife involves the reconciliation of civil secular law with religious law. Under New Jersey law and most jurisdictions, you can disinherit everyone. You can disinherit your kids, and you can leave everything for your cat. But you cannot disinherit your wife, and you cannot disinherit your husband. So each spouse has what's called, in equitable distribution jurisdictions like New Jersey, what's called an elective share. So if you disinherit your wife, or you give her 10% in your will, she can go to court in New Jersey and contest the will and say, I want to take my elective share, which is up to 1/2 of the estate. So what we've seen in the Sharia, that there are many avenues that a wife can be protected, and a spouse can be protected without violating the rules. For example, you are free to increase your mahr during your lifetime. So maybe when you got married and you were still in your 20s, your mahr was $10,000. Well, now you're doing well. You could increase it to $50,000. You can increase it to $200,000. A mahr is considered a debt, and a debt that has to be paid from the gross estate. So the wife will receive her postponed mahr, plus she will receive her 1/8, not violating the Islamic law, not violating the Sharia. In fact, if you go to any Muslim jurisdiction, from Pakistan to Syria to Palestine, a mahr is considered a preferential debt against the estate. So it has to be paid first. Similarly, we can take a position regarding the marriage contract, the obligation to provide a domestic servant, a helper at the house. So under traditional Sharia and fiqh, it says that the husband is responsible to provide food, shelter, and clothing, and someone to help around the house. Now, in Iran, for example, the women's movement created a reform in Iran, because under Islamic law, there's no post-divorce alimony. Generally, you have nafaqat al-idda, and once that's over, you're done. So what they did is they created a cause of action called ujrat al-mithil, which basically takes the position is that you are required, as my husband, to maintain me and support me during the marriage. If you failed to sustain that maintenance at any time during the marriage, I have been harmed, and I have been you have been unjustly enriched, and you have a claim for that compensation. Again, in the Shariawiz platform, it allows you to say, you know what, my wife has been doing all this for the past 15 years. I have not compensated her. I want to acknowledge the debt that I owe her for all of these things that she's done. That amount of money or property will be a debt against the estate. And again, she would receive that debt, plus she would receive the 1/8. Also, we have the Cad West Cia Theory. And this is a theory that's based on a saying, on a story of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And we all know that Umar ibn al-Khattab was called al-Faruq, the just. So there was a woman who was married, and she was known in Mecca that she was a famous seamstress and embroidery woman. So she would make these dresses and make these clothes, and her husband would take the clothing and sell it in the souk. They had no children. He died. His family said, okay, no children, you are entitled to 25% of his estate. So she goes to Umar ibn Khattab and says, Amir al-Mu'mineen, you know who I am. You know that I'm the one who stayed up all night working and contributing to the acquisition of this wealth. He says, yes, absolutely. You're going to get half of it because it's yours, and I'm going to give you a quarter, which is your inheritance. So he flipped the formula. Instead of giving the paternal family 3/4, he gave her 3/4. Based on this story, the Maliki scholars created a cause of action called Cad West Cia, which means that if a wife had contributed, worked at the farm, worked at the business, managed the money and invested, she's created an equitable interest. She has a claim to it. So we also offer you that option. If you believe that's the case, then acknowledge that debt. And this way she would receive her 1/8 plus that debt. So this is just to try to provide you with that the Sharia has the solutions. The answers are there. It's just a matter of us engaging in understanding the Sharia not as something that is black and white. We have to look at the Sharia as a system, as a methodology, as an epistemology that produces knowledge. And when we acknowledge that, the Sharia is dynamic, alive, and adapts way more than even Western legal systems. And that's the ultimate objective of Shariawiz, is we want to provide Muslim Americans with an affordable, accessible way to create their estate plan, 15, 20 minutes for a very affordable price, and also teach them about the Sharia and the genius of the system.
But I had a question here, right? Because, you know, a lot of us, you know, we came from overseas, a lot of Palestine, Egypt, wherever, and a lot of our families have property and assets overseas. How does that work here? Is a will here can handle our assets overseas?
No.
Does there have to be a separate document over there that has to be handled?
Now, the reason why the majority of Muslim scholars in the US have concluded that it is obligatory to have an Islamic will in the US is because if you lived in a Muslim majority country, you do not need to have a will because it's by operation of law. That's the default law. So when you pass away in Egypt or you pass away in Palestine, it's the Islamic law of inheritance, period. You cannot deviate or opt out of that system. And that's the same in Pakistan. You are governed as a Muslim by the Hanafi Islamic rules of inheritance. So you're in the Islamic will in the US, you're governing the property and your estate here. In the Muslim country, it's already governed by Islamic law. The only thing is you do have a flexibility up to 1/3 of your estate to give it to a non-Islamic heir taker, meaning if my son is a beneficiary of my estate, I'm not able to give him up to 1/3 extra. That would violate the Sharia. You could use that 1/3 to give to a poor relative, somebody you care about, and mostly to support charitable organizations such as your mosque. So at the Shariawiz platform, it allows you and encourages you not to forget your mosque. I mean, charity, sadaqah jariyah, is something that, you know, we have zakah, which is an obligation, and the sadaqah jariyah is highly recommended. It's the one thing that the Prophet Muhammad said, after you pass away, all of your good deeds, they're all gone except 3 things. A knowledge that benefits people, a son or a daughter that is righteous and prays for you, or a sadaqah jariyah. And the sadaqah jariyah has been the heart and soul of the sustainable institution funding in 1,300 years of Islamic history. Algeria, Palestine, Egypt, Pakistan, the majority of these countries, half of their property was owned by waqfs. was not private owned because of the strength of this sadaqah jariyah. That is such an important thing, our concern about the hereafter. And in the Quran, it tells you, and I'm paraphrasing, and God is telling this, this Muslim is saying, you know, the God is telling him, you're going to come and you're going to tell me, don't take me now. I don't want my life to end. Give me a little bit more time because I want to be virtuous and I got to give sadaqah. Because we're all going to say when we're going to come to our Creator, give us more time so that we can give. Because that is such a significant part of our articles of faith. And by doing a will, by doing an estate plan, you're going to be thinking of your legacy. You're going to be thinking of leaving a sadaqah jariyah to help a poor relative or an institution.
Absolutely, inshallah. You know, for the ISCJ community, right, and Brother Abed, is with COVID, we're probably seeing a lot of these things where a lot of, you know, our Muslim community members are passing away and they don't have a will of any sort. And at that point, what do they do? All right, you know, like, do they, you know, what's their recourse or course of action at that point?
They have to go to court. So somebody passes away without a will. You're not going to be able to get access to his bank accounts. You're not going to be able to get access to his digital media. You're not going to be access to, you know, titles or transfer property. You have to go to court and obtain letters of administration, get somebody appointed who's going to be running and gathering up the estate. And then after court, you'll be able to gather and get these things together. But in the end, it'll be distributed according to New Jersey law, New Jersey secular intestacy laws. So basically, the decedent had no say in how his estate is being distributed.
So, you know, ISCJ community in Central Jersey and wherever you're watching this, whether it's live or you're going to watch it tonight or tomorrow, I mean, I don't know what else anybody can say, because over the years, everyone has emphasized, requested and pleaded. You've had imams give khutbahs on this, is take care of your will. You know, however you do it, you know, through Shariawiz or through a lawyer, whatever it is, but take care of it because you don't want to be put in that situation. We talked about a little bit earlier. It's not just about the assets, but it's even end of life directives.
Absolutely.
You know, just in the past year, we've conducted a couple seminars in person about, you know, the end of life directives and how to handle that. And again, it's difficult conversations, it's difficult topics, but I think, as you know, we have to be mature about it and really have these conversations with our spouses, our relatives, our families, however it is, and have it, because the time that we invest now, even though it's difficult, it will make things easier when the time comes. Is that?
Absolutely.
I'm summarizing it in layman's terms, but
I mean,
please articulate it better.
Yeah, I mean, you're grieving your family. Do you want to be running to court trying to get these paperwork when, if you had a will, everybody's appointed and it'll be a smooth probating and transition, as opposed to having to hire a lawyer and file paperwork and petitions and so forth and so on.
Another question that's come in, it's come up actually last week too here, right? With everything being shut down, essentially, right? And essential services. There was some idea or conversation, actually, we heard from one of our UIF people that they said that you can do a virtual notary. Do you know anything about that? Can you talk about that? Because a notary is going to be required for a will, right?
No, it's not. So
it's not. Okay.
For a will, you just need to have two witnesses under New Jersey law, two witnesses, and they have to witness the decedent testator signing. Now, having it notarized is better because it becomes almost like a self-authenticating, self-proving affidavit. So we always recommend and we always do it by notarization, but not having it notarized still could be valid, but you'll have a proof issue, you know, when you probate it, only if it's contested in most jurisdictions. Now, there's a service called notarize.com. So Shariawiz has a contract with notarize.com. We haven't implemented their API on our site yet. We're still considering. There's only one, there's one state, Nevada, that's allowing remote notarization of a will. That's the law in Nevada. In Florida, in July, they're going to also, the law will take effect that you can notarize a will. Now, currently, because of COVID, there's a bunch of executive orders, like in New York, that's allowing remote notarization, but under strict guidelines. You have to say certain statements, and you got to record, and you got to get it signed, and the signature has to be sent to you. So there's no real e-signature except in Nevada. But the trend is in that direction to allow remote notarization. Now, remote notarization is still possible with a lot of real estate documents. It's just this will that's a little bit sensitive, because you're able to use a notary remotely that is based in Virginia, because in Virginia law, it allows a Virginia notary to notarize remotely from anywhere from the US. And because that is valid under Virginia law, based on the full faith and credit in our Constitution, New Jersey would recognize that formal remote notarization. But in a will, it's a little bit more sensitive.
Okay, so that makes sense. That then doesn't conflict with what we heard last week with our guests. So it is happening remotely in real estate documents.
Yes.
But the wills is a little bit more tricky. But again, like you just said, it is not actually required. Is it good? Yes. We should always try to get it. But if it's a situation where you can't get it notarized, it's still a valid.
You can still have it valid by witnesses.
Okay. All right. We have one more question. I'll take that as the last question, then we'll wrap it up here. The question that's coming from the chat here is, how does an irrevocable trust fit into estate planning? How does it overlap with a will?
Yeah, well, with an irrevocable trust is basically you are transferring an asset into the trust. So you are transferring your ownership and title from your name into an irrevocable trust. So you have no control. You have control of the asset and its income and its management during your lifetime, but you cannot revoke it. So after your death, it's going to have to devolve based on whatever those terms. These issues on irrevocable trusts and things were used mainly for estate tax planning purposes. There are other non-tax purposes that people would use them, but the marital deduction now, if you're married, it's like 20 million. So unless if your estate is like 20 million, you're not going to pay estate tax, federal taxes. You may have some exposure on state estate taxes. So trusts, and you can have what's called a trust-based estate plan, and you can have a will-based estate plan. A will-based estate plan, you still have to probate it in court. When you do an irrevocable trust or a revocable trust-based estate plan, you are appointing a trustee who's going to manage the estate. So there is less court involvement in the process. But of course, it's more costly and more involved.
Okay, good. All right. I did say that was going to be the last question, and I want to wrap it up. I really want to thank our guest today. I want to thank the community. We're very blessed and honored to have you. Abed, we're going to have to see you in person when this, inshallah, may Allah bless you and your family and keep everyone safe. And again, Shariawiz, you guys can Google it. There's a lot of stuff out there, information. Absolutely. But again, alhamdulillah, we have a lot of different options in our community. And, please do your due diligence and, make the best decision that's for your family and your situation, inshallah. Absolutely.
And I got to say one thing is, Adif, thank you very much for your selfless dedication to the community. You take time putting these things together, so my contribution is minimal compared to what you do, brother. Thank you very much, and Ramadan Mubarak.
Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum, ISCJ community and everyone.
Bye-bye.